Welcome to another episode of Things You Didn't Know About the Holocaust. I'm Phyllis Zimbler Miller, and my guest today is Terence Petty. Now, he's the author of the new book, which I will give the link in the description later, called Nazis at the Water Cooler, War Criminals, and Post-War German Government. But today he's going to share with us the story of the newspaper Munich Post that in the 30s actually stood up against the Nazis. And he recounts this in another one of his books called Enemy of the People, the Munich Post, and the Journalists Who Opposed Hitler. So welcome, Terence, and let's start with putting my audience. We have to assume that they don't know as much as the two of us. We've just been discussing Munich because, as I told Terence, my husband and I were stationed with the U.S. Army in Munich from September 70 to May 72. So Munich has ever since then been, I must tell you, when we got the phone call that where we were going, I skipped that part of the story, but I had to look it up. I had no idea where Munich even was. I was 21, or maybe I was just 22, and I had to look it up on the German map. So it's in Bavaria in the south, and it was the birthplace of Nazism. And Terence is going to take you a little bit about that, and then we're going to get to the journalists.
Hello. Thank you for the invitation, and it's great to meet you. And I'm really happy to have the chance to talk about the Munich Post because so many people don't know about this brave little newspaper sitting in the middle of the Bavarian capital, surrounded by Nazis. It was I learned a lot from writing this book. I already knew a lot about Germany and the Nazis and Adolf Hitler, but reading about this newspaper gave me a new appreciation for those times and how much we really don't know. We know a lot, but the time leading up to Hitler taking over, it's kind of been glossed over. So it was fun for me to read the Munich Post newspaper. I went to Munich, and the newspapers are kept at a library in Munich, a city-owned library. And I spent days and days and days and days over the course of about 3 weeks reading the newspaper, taking notes. So it was really a great experience for me, and I'm hoping that that book shows readers something different, something that they didn't know about those times, especially the possibility or pointing out that there were efforts, even by some newspapers, to stop Hitler from coming to power. The Munich Post is very unusual. It was owned by socialists, by the Democratic Party, and the Social Democratic Party. They had their own major newspaper, but the Munich Post is in a position because it was in the birthplace of the Nazi Party. They were in a position to watch the growth of the Nazi Party, to watch the emergence of Adolf Hitler, to go to the Nazi rallies, to go to Hitler's rallies, and they sent reporters, they're actually mainly editors, to these events and wrote about them, and the reporting is just incredible. One thing that I found out about the Munich Post is they actually used what we would consider today investigative journalism, and that is what they would do is they would find Nazi officials in the Brown House, which was the Nazis' headquarters in Munich. They would find
Wait,
people,
and it's called the Brown House.
Brown's house, yeah, that's Brown House, um, and I don't remember why, but the Munich Post would find people in the Brown House who were discontents. They might have been uh, parts of some rival factions within the Nazi Party because these rival factions did exist. There was a
Yes.
great deal of competition within the Nazi Party for influence and for power. So the Munich Post would find people who had access to documents, and they would the person who mainly was arranged arranged this. His name was Auer, Erhard Auer, and he was the executive editor. And he had all these sources in the Brown House, and so he was the primary person who was able to get his hands on these
Wait,
documents.
we haven't told them what
Yeah.
years are we talking about?
So this started
Yes, when did it
in
start?
approximately 1922, as near as I can see from what appeared in the newspaper. So their reporting went from about 1922 up until the day that they were shut down in March, I believe, 1933.
Okay, so wait, let me.
Yeah,
March of 33 is 2 months after Hitler was first given legal power and then
yeah,
became a dictator. So I don't want to get this wrong, but November 8th of either 22 or 23 was the beer hall push in Munich.
they were there. They reported on it.
So is it 22 or 23? I can never remember.
23.
Okay. So
Yeah.
they were there. Okay, so they were there at the
So,
beginning.
and that night, this is a really fascinating thing reading through the newspapers. I went back to that year to see if they had reported on it, and yes, they reported on it. And what happened was this: they reported on it in the following day, and and they were able to get the newspaper out, even though that night of the putsch, the at stormtroopers raced to the newspaper offices and raided it, trashed it, broke windows, threw stuff out the windows, ledger books, typewriters, just made a total mess. And they went looking for the editors of the paper, and the editors of the paper they'd fled. So they didn't find them. So the newspaper was wrecked. But they managed to put out an edition and describe what happened that night. And it's just reading the post description of the putsch and what happened to the newspaper that night. It was just it's very chilling. The wife of the chief editor, well, the essay after breaking into the newspaper offices, they raced to the apartment of the main editor. He wasn't there, so they broke into the apartment, and his wife was there, and his daughter, and the daughter's child, and the stormtroopers. They threatened the wife. They threatened the daughter. They wanted to know where the editor was, and they wouldn't tell the stormtroopers. So they left there mad. And after leaving there, they raced up and down the street yelling threats at the wife. So yes, they were there. They reported on it. Um,
Wait, let's
and
clarify.
yeah,
The stormtroopers went there because the
yeah,
newspaper had already been uh, publishing information against
exactly.
Hitler or
Right.
warning of Hitler, correct?
Right. Yes, it was they went there for revenge.
Okay.
And so yeah, the paper had started um looking at the finances, Hitler's finances, how he was becoming such a powerful figure in the party.
You also
Um,
mean wealthy, right?
hmm?
You mean financially
Well,
doing
wealth, right?
things.
Yeah, wealthy patrons. Where the money was coming from. I mean, this at the time, this guy was viewed as a total clown. So, and a lot of people were ignoring him because he just didn't seem like he was a real politician. But the Post, that's not the way the Post looked at it. From very early on, because of his rhetoric, they could see that he was a threat to the Republic, to the German democracy. So they went after him almost as soon as he showed up. And they were relentless. They were persistent, and the Post um, got Hitler very angry. Um, so they were reporting on him. Um, it was um, it was very rigorous through his arrest, and they kept an eye on him when he was in Landsberg, the prison where he spent. It was just he just
We need to tell people why was he in prison? Because the putsch was put down and there was a trial
right. There was a trial, and he got a very light sentence.
for
I think
treason. For
for
treason.
exactly, yeah. He was sent to Landsberg, and the Post um, kept an eye on him. And then when he came out,
Wait. He only
yep,
served, I forget how many months of his 5 year sentence, something like 8. Don't quote me, anyone, but something like that.
yeah, me neither because I forgot. But it
And
was
he got to wear his own clothes, and he dictated his first version of Mein Kampf to forget who, one of the future top Nazis who was in prison with him. Okay, now we
yes, exactly, yep. Um, so he gets out. Hitler gets out, and to a lot of Germany, he's no longer a threat because he was arrested. He served time. But that's not the way the Munich Post looked at it. They kept writing about him, saying it's dangerous to ignore him. He remains a threat because of his rhetoric. I mean, he kept it up, and the Munich Post kept it up. Um, there was as Hitler's um, popularity grew, this became even more alarming to the Munich Post. And along about, I want to say 1931 or so, they became even more aggressive in their reporting about Hitler. They found more people willing to leak documents. They got some incredible documents. There was a document hinting about the Holocaust that was to come, all sorts of things. And I mean, what they reported on, what they did, what they put on the front page and on the inside pages was virtually showing the Nazi playbook, Hitler's playbook. And they did this for about 2.5 years before they were violently shut down by the Nazis.
so they were able to report on his being chosen chancellor. That they were able to report on before they were shut down.
Yes, they did. Yeah. So he was made chancellor January 30, 1933, and they were raided and shut down in March. I forgot the date of that year.
Just
And
to put people also, DACA was open that month.
yes, right. Yeah. So a lot of the people, so when they were shut down, this occurred when the Nazis took firm control of Munich. What was happening across Germany at the time was this thing called Gleichschaltung, which is bringing into line or forcing into line, and it's a process used by the Nazis just to Nazify everything in the country, all of society, all of business. Everything was to be brought into line with Nazi ideology. And interestingly enough, Munich was one of the last places to fall into line. They had actually resisted until the last moment. And then Hitler sent in his goons, and they arrived at Munich train station, and they just started taking over, and that included raiding the Munich Post, arresting social democrats, communists, Jews. It was just bringing the whole city into line. So I'd like to, if I could, just say
Yes,
something about what made this newspaper really different.
yes, absolutely.
So the newspaper landscape in Germany was such that there were three or four different layers to it. There was the um, respectable newspapers like um, oh boy, it'll come to me. Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung was a big one. These were big metropolitan dailies, and they covered the Nazis and they covered Hitler. That has to be said. Um, but they did it in a different style. They did it in a style that was not as aggressive or visceral or frankly interesting is what the Munich Post did. They were kind of highbrow newspapers, and there were certain standards that they followed. They considered themselves to be opinion makers, and another level of the press. So these main papers, they were, like I said, in the main cities. They're in Berlin, Munich, Frankfurt, um, Hamburg. Another level was the political party owned newspapers. The communists had theirs. The Nazis had theirs. Der Angriff was one of the Nazis' newspapers. Social Democrats had theirs, and they included the Munich Post. What I found really fascinating about the Munich Post and the socialist newspapers is that even though they would be considered party hacks today, and I mean, today a journalist, you can't, if you're a journalist, you don't belong to a political party. You don't spread your party's ideology and beliefs. You just
We hope. This is not a political show, but I'm not going to give Terrence a really hard time now about what I just recently read about the AP style book and how upset I was after reading the Wall Street Journal article by James Taranto that the AP style book has decided to be woke and it gives a lot of opinions rather than just style. But anyway, we would agree
yeah.
that we're supposed to be objective. I was trained as a journalist too. And okay, go ahead.
So, what makes the Munich Post really fascinating to me is that they were dedicated Democrats. They were
Wait,
um,
wait. He means to democracy.
democracy, yet defenders of the Democratic Republic, defenders of the Weimar democracy.
Okay, wait, wait. Another station break. The
Yeah,
Weimar Republic was started after the end of World War One, which was
yep,
in 1918, before there had been a Kaiser, a king, whatever you want to call him.
yep.
And one of the problems is that the Germans did not take to democracy very well.
That's it. Yeah. Although there was a sizable portion of the population who were social democrats who did.
The,
The Social Democrats did very well in elections leading up to the end of democracy. Um, but there are various reasons that failed. So the Munich Post, they were defenders of the democracy. They were ideologues belonging to the Democratic Party. But they were determined, and they saw the blinking red lights, and they went after Hitler tooth and nail to show the country what the threat was. No other newspaper did what the Munich Post did. None other. And there are various reasons for that. As I mentioned, one of them is because they were there in the birthplace of the Nazi Party, but a lot of it was just their gutsiness, their courage. I read somewhere that one thing that to keep in mind about the Munich Post was that they saw themselves um, not so much as journalists. They saw themselves as prosecutors of a crime. That's the
Mhm.
way they went at it. So they didn't really see themselves as journalists. They saw themselves as um, as I said, prosecutors. They collected documents, they collected evidence, and they put it in the newspaper. There's one astonishing edition. There are a lot of astonishing editions of the Munich Post. In one edition, they have this two-page spread listing every single crime that they had uncovered within the Nazi Party, listing all these political assassinations, just everything that they knew at the time. It's just it's an amazing piece of journalism. But again, it's not really journalism. What this is, it reads like a court document. It reads like a list of crimes, a list. It reads like evidence. And this is the way that the Munich Post intended it for it to be read.
Now, okay, so I noticed you said assassinations. So what happened if they published so and so was assassinated by the Nazi Party? Then what happened?
Um, well, they were often taken to court,
Okay, so
multiple,
that's okay. That's what I wanted.
multiple lawsuits. They lost a lot of them because of the conservative judges and in
Conservative
Munich.
again. Why don't you explain what you mean?
Yeah, well, there are various kinds of conservatives in Germany at the time, in Munich then. So it has to be said that it's not only the Nazis who were being violent at the time. There was kind of street warfare. And it was, it was started by the Nazis. But the most of the political parties had their own um, street fighters, their own militias. Even the Social Democrats had their own militia, and they were actually put together to protect Social Democrats at rallies from being attacked by Nazis. The communists had their own militias, so there was a lot of instability happening in Germany at the time. And these murders, they're reported on. They, if you go into the documents of Munich police, you can see all these they were being reported on, and the cops investigated. Sometimes people were arrested. Um, so I mean, it would sometimes what the Post reported on, just as far as kind of like police blotter stuff, it was known at the time, but there's just so much of it. But what the way the Munich Post handled it was they had this style of using this information to get under Hitler's skin. I mean, just the way they wrote about these things. It's not just police blotter to them. They would make narratives. They would make stories out of what the Nazis were doing. And they're
Wait,
very
wait, I
pointed.
got to clarify. They didn't
Yeah.
make up fairy tales. They made a narrative around them. That
They made a narrative, right? They stated why it was important, and they stated how this underscores the threat by Hitler to the Republic, and that was for virtually everything that they put in the paper. That's the way it was presented. So some of it was in this one edition I was telling you about. Yeah, a lot of it kind of looked like police blotter, but it was there to be used to prosecute the Nazis within the populace.
and was any of it used? I mean, besides the trial that had a specific connection to the push, was any of the material used in trials that you know of?
Yeah, by the Nazis in lawsuits against the Munich Post. Um, um,
Interesting.
Yeah, as yeah, they claim that, oh, there are a lot of libel lawsuits,
I can
and
imagine.
and even though what the Post reported, the Post could be a little fast and loose sometimes with the facts. But that sort of didn't matter to them. What mattered to them was that they knew the overall truth. They knew the degree of threat that Hitler posed, and they would do anything because they knew the truth. They knew the threat. But yeah, there were a couple of occasions that I'd spotted going through the documents, and even reported by the Munich Post itself, where they had come up with a couple of different stories that didn't pan out, and they'd lost some lawsuits because of that kind of reporting.
So today, for people who are interested, except I just looked it up, it's been closed since December and won't open again until May of this year. There is a where the Brown House stood. There's I think it's 4 stories. I mean, I've been there, but I
Sounds
don't think
right.
I counted the stories. It's got a long name. The Munich Documentation Center for the History of National Socialism. It has a huge book that's so heavy. If I hold it up, I don't know if you can see it. And what's fascinating about it is that you start at the top of the floor is the early years. And I was there with my daughter Yael a few years ago. And when she was much younger, we had been at the Museum of the National Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC. And I had wanted to get onto the Holocaust right away. And, those rooms. And she said, no, we need to look at these rooms that build up to the history. At the time, I thought, why?
Uh, yeah.
Well, then when I was at that museum, even before I started this project, I realized I'm not political, but what I'm trying to say is that if one cares about one's democracy, one needs to understand what led up to it. And I think that this interwar period is so overlooked.
Mhm.
And the fact that the Munich Post was doing this and and
Yeah.
to me is amazing, which is why I wanted to have
Yeah.
Terrence on the show.
Yeah. And then, yeah, you're right. I mean, to understand how um, um, how despotism occurs, it really is important to look at what led up to it, and to understand, to see the possible moments where despotism could have been stopped. And that's one of the fascinating things about looking at the Weimar era, to see where there was some resistance, to see where there was understanding, and to see why people didn't respond viscerally against the Nazi movement.
And I just wanted to say to make it clear, in that top floor, there are a lot of newspaper articles. At the time, I didn't know to look to see which ones. And I just think we needed to explain why is it called the Weimar Republic? It means the republic between the end of World War I and the Nazis took over. But Weimar was the city that it was just named for a city because it
Right,
used to throw me off. I used to think, who are they? So that's when we use that term. That's what we're meaning. We're meaning the constitutional Republic of Germany.
right. It was there was a meeting in Weimar, and they drafted a constitution, and that's where it passed and signed in Weimar, which, by the way, is a beautiful city. It's one of my favorite cities in Germany.
I've never been there, but it's in Prussia, right? It's up at the north.
It is over by Leipzig. It's in um, former East Germany.
I always think because when we lived there, there was West and East Germany.
Yeah,
I always think in terms of is it in the former East
it is,
Germany?
right. And there used to be a huge Soviet army base there.
Oh, that I did not know.
Yep.
So my point is that, okay, this is not political. I'm just making a statement. Those of us who might just look at headlines today, meaning social media's headlines, need to take time to read some reputable news. Well, it's a newspaper person, a newspaper, print articles, not talking heads, but print articles that go into it and explain so that you better understand what's happening in your own world.
Yeah. I would also encourage people to look at documents, and there are a lot of documents, historical documents can be found online now. And that's where you find the nuts and bolts of history. It's where you find out what's really going on when you look at authentic original documents. I know that's expecting a lot
I,
from a population, but it's also kind of fun.
I'm trying to remember in my draft, my book, Things You Didn't Know About the Holocaust, I already quoted Terrence about something. The Munich Post, that article that literally said what Hitler was planning for the Jews.
Yep,
Do you remember? I should have had it in front of me. Do you remember off the top of your head when that was? But it was before he was ever elected chancellor. And it
that's
literally
right.
said, I'm telling his story, but Jews will lose their lose their citizenship. Terrence, if you can find it quickly to give us a year while
Yeah.
and
Bear with me here.
I was just fascinated by that. And I put it in the
Um,
draft for my book because was anyone paying attention? And literally,
yeah. Um,
so
Bear with me.
clearly, oh, I called it a secret document, as I recall. Someone from the Brown House gave that document.
Yes. We
It
don't
was
know who.
not supposed to be seen.
We don't know who. So uh the document in question, the Munich Post reported on it on December 9th, 1931.
Okay, wait,
Um,
wait. We just got to remind people this
yeah,
is 14 months basically before Hindenburg made Hitler chancellor. Okay,
yeah,
now
right.
go.
So if you'd like, I'll read a very quick
Yes, I
passage
would
here.
like you to read it.
All right. So this is from a document obtained by the Munich Post and published on December 9, 1931. Um, and I wrote in my book, for years, the Munich Post editors printed whatever they could to raise the anti-Nazi alarm, but their edition of December 9, 1931 still provides a searing shock for its reportage in the headline on one particular story. For Munich readers that day, and for others generations later, it presents a black and white refutation of claims that would be made by Germans after the Second World War that they didn't know about Hitler's nefarious plans for Jews. And I'm quoting from the document that was obtained by the Post here. The Nazi Party leadership has, for the eventuality of taking power, drafted special guidelines for the, quote, solution of the Jewish question, unquote, the Post reported, noting that the plans were being kept secret by the Nazi leaders. Quote, for tactical reasons, all public discussion of the Jewish question has been put off. They fear a foreign policy impact in London and Paris, but practically speaking, there is an exact plan, unquote, for all of Germany, the newspaper said. I'm sorry, that last quote was from the Post itself. The article running under a startling boldface headline that no reader could miss, Jews in the Third Reich, proceeded to quote from that secret plan. And I'll just
Yeah,
read
read it,
very,
read that.
okay. Um, So this is from the Nazi document. All Jews living in Germany have no right to citizenship. No Jew can have a civil service job. A Jew cannot give testimony in a German court. All Jews living in Germany will be placed under special laws. They are to pay a special tax. Medical treatment of Christians by Jews is not allowed. Marriages between Jews and Christians will be declared invalid. Jewish children are not allowed to attend German schools and universities. And there was more from my book. Germany would reserve the right to, quote, intern or deport, unquote, undesirable, quote, Jewish denizens, unquote, who violate the, quote, interests of the German folk. from my book as a final solution that was in quotes in the Nazi document of how to deal with German Jews. The newspaper reported, quote, "It is proposed to use Jews in Germany for labor and reclaiming German moorlands with the SS watching over them." And I'll read a little bit more from my
Yeah,
book.
I ended my quote there, but you can go ahead if you want.
Um, it is chilling how close what actually happened during the Holocaust comes to the Nazi guidelines disclosed by the Munich Post. There's no mention in the guidelines of setting up death camps like Auschwitz in countries to be occupied by the Nazis or of massacring Jewish men, women, and children in East European towns and burying them in mass graves. The specifics of those actions were worked out by the Nazi leadership after Germany invaded its neighbors to the east. Nonetheless, the guidelines, which is what the Nazis called this document, published by the Post, offer a foretaste of the Nuremberg race laws in 1935 that stripped Jews of their basic rights and set the stage for the Holocaust.
Yes, yes. I was
Chilling, isn't
startled
it?
to read that.
Yeah,
And yet
yeah,
nothing happened.
nothing happened. Yeah, nothing happened. And one reason is because um, pe normal German newspaper readers had the New York Post editors were viewed as kind of uncouth, um, um, dishonest because of the way they pursued what they did, and not real journalists. And in a way, they weren't real journalists, but not upholding the high standards of the German press at the time. The Munich Post liked to dig into dig into stuff, unsavory stuff, put uh, sexual rumors about about Hitler in the newspaper, that kind of thing. And to a lot of Germans, this is just distasteful and something something that you don't do. So this, yeah, I mean, it's difficult for us to understand at the time, but Germany is such a troubled place at that time. It was so fractured. I mean, it was much like today. Um, uh, uh, it was in instability, economic instability, all the political violence that was happening. Um, so yeah, it was, I suspect, difficult to get these points across, even though there it was in black and white, and fully documented by the Munich Post.
I think of the term that I saw recently about Germany during the interwar years was in a permanent crisis,
Yes.
which is true, and it's what you just described. But still, you would think that, I don't know, you'd think that other newspapers would have picked up on that particular story, for example.
Yeah.
And yet you
Yeah.
didn't find any
But
proof that anyone had paid any attention to it.
no, I didn't see any reporting on that in any other newspaper. No.
Without being political, I'm just going to say when Terence was describing all the things that Hitler had done, I was thinking about one of the papers that I read listing the daily all the things that have been decided politically or take back. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying, and it makes me very nervous when we talk about these things that happened in the 30s, 20s, and 30s, and what we see here. But that's not the purpose of this show. So we will stick to history. And I will thank Terence so much for sharing this really, really important history with us. I'll put a link to his newest book, which I will eventually get to read after my other pile of books. And I thank you again but as I end every show, I do say, may the memory of the victims and those who tried to save them be a blessing forever.